Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to Storytime. Today we are going to continue our book, Dangerous Journey. If you remember, last week we read about Christian and Faithful's journey through Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair was a very, very difficult town. Faithful ended up losing his life, but as he did, he made it to the Celestial City and was welcomed with open arms. Christian proved to be very wise going through Vanity Fair. And now we are going to read what happens in chapter 7, entitled Doubting Castle. It was as well that Christian had Hopeful as his new companion. He would soon be in dire need of him. For I beheld in my dream that they had not journeyed far, the road ahead being very rough, and their feet very tender with traveling, when they became much discouraged. At this point Christian espied a stile which led into a meadow, and seemed to be a shortcut. "Here's better going," he said. "Come, good Hopeful, let's climb over it." "What if it leads us out of our way?" asked Hopeful. "That's not likely," replied Christian. "Look, there's another man walking ahead of us." So Hopeful and Christian journey, and they try to take a shortcut. Let's see what happens. So over the stile they went, and Christian was well pleased that the path was easier on his feet. But in leaving the road, he had made a terrible mistake. For soon night came on, and it grew very dark. They completely lost sight of the pilgrim ahead. Did they but know it, his name was Vain Confidence. Suddenly they heard in the darkness a shriek, followed by an eerie silence. "We'll go no further," said Hopeful in a whisper, clutching at Christian's arm. "Who could have thought that this path would lead us nowhere?" Christian exclaimed. "I was afraid of it from the first," admitted Hopeful. "I would have spoken up before, only you are older than I." "Good brother, let's try to go back again," Christian urged him. But even as they tried to turn back, it started to rain and lighten and thunder in a very dreadful manner. "Where are we now?" asked Hopeful, without hope. His companion didn't answer. He was completely lost, for the deluge had caused the waters to rise amain and wash away the path. They were even in great danger of being drowned, had they not found a narrow ledge with an overhanging rock. Here they sheltered as best they could and waited for the dawn, and being tired out, they fell asleep. Oh my, what is this we see? It was broad daylight when they were awakened by a grim and surly voice. "What are you doing?" it said. "In my private grounds." Looking up, they saw before him the gloomy figure of Giant Despair, owner of Doubting Castle, out for his morning walk. "We're just poor pilgrims who've lost our way," they said. "You're trespassing," said the giant. "Trampling down my fields, I'll have to teach you a lesson." They had little to say. They knew they were in the wrong, and since he was stronger than they were forced to accompany him. In the light of day, they could now see before them the battlements of Doubting Castle. Here they were cast into a dungeon, dark and stinking, and here they lay from Wednesday morning till Saturday night, without one bite of bread or one drop of water. No one came to visit them. They were cut off from their friends. No one knew where they were. Christian realized it was all his fault for taking the shortcut, and this caused him double sorrow. Now Giant Despair had a wife. Her name was Diffidence. He never did anything without consulting her, and she was even more malevolent than he was. So when he was gone to bed, she asked him about the prisoners, who they were, whence they came, and whither they were bound. He told her and asked her what he should do with them. "You're too soft-hearted," she said. "What you must do when you get up in the morning is to beat them without mercy." So, in the morning, he cut himself a grievous cudgel from a crab-apple tree in his garden. Then, railing upon his prisoners as if they were dogs, though they had never uttered a word against him, he beat them most fearfully and left them helpless on the floor to spend another day in sighs and lamentations. Next night, the giant was again talking to his wife in bed. "What? Are they still alive?" she asked. "They've nothing left to live for. So when you get up in the morning, you must tell them to make an end of themselves." Up he got, and went to them in a surly manner as before, and perceiving them to be very sore from the bruises he had given them on the previous day, he consoled them as his wife advised. "Your only way out of this place," he said, "is by death. So why are you waiting? Make an end of yourselves. Why should you choose life, seeing it is attended by so much bitterness?" He had thoughtfully provided them with a noose, a knife, and a bottle of poison, so they could have a choice. When they respectfully declined, he looked upon them in a very ugly manner. He would have killed them there and then himself, but that he fell into one of his fits. For the giant had a secret weakness. On dark and cloudy days, he was as strong as an ox. But in sunshiny weather, he fell into fits. They caused him to lose the use of his hand, and so, for a time, he had to withdraw. Then Christian and Hopeful discussed among themselves what they should do. "Perhaps the giant is right," said Christian. "Perhaps death would be better than the miserable life we lead." "Not everything is in the hands of the giant Despair," said Hopeful. "Who knows but he may have another of his fits and forget to lock us in. Let us not be out our own murderers." In this way, Hopeful moderated the mind of his brother, and so they continued together another day in the dark. Then, night being come, and the giant and his wife being in bed, she asked him again about the prisoners, to which he replied, "They are sturdy rogues. They chose to bear all hardships rather than make away with themselves." "Then here's what you must do," she said. "Tomorrow morning, take them to the castle yard and show them the bones and the skulls of those whom you have already dispatched." Look at that. Up got the giant once again and took his prisoners into the castle yard, as his wife had bidden him. "These," he said, pointing to the skeletons, "were pilgrims just like you, who trespassed in my grounds. When I thought of it, I tore them in pieces, and within 10 days I will do to you." Back in their dungeon, Christian nearly swooned away, for now, through lack of food and by reason of his bruises, he could hardly breathe. But Hopeful again encouraged him. "My brother," he said, "Apollyon couldn't crush you, nor the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And remember how you played the man in Vanity Fair? Don't forget, I'm in the dungeon with you, a far weaker man by nature than you are. This giant has wounded me as well as you, and cut off the bread and water from my mouth, and like you, I'm deprived of light. So let us exercise a little more patience, and bear up, as best we can and keep on praying. Then, as often happens in dreams, when things are desperate, Christian suddenly remembered. I have in my pocket, he said, an old key called Promise. It might just fit the lock. Try it, said hopefully. It was the middle of the night when Diffidence sat up in bed and roused her husband. Perhaps, she said, they have picked locks with them. That's why they live in hope. Sayest thou so, my dear, said Giant Despair. I'll search them in the morning. That's time enough. Even then, Christian was trying the dungeon door with his key. The lock went damnable hard. Weak as he was, he had to work at it. But at last the key began to turn. There was a creaking and groaning, and the door swung open, and in came the light of the dawn. What's that noise? Said the giant, waking with a start. Better go and see, my dear, said his wife. Christian and Hopeful had run through the door, only to be confronted by a new obstacle, a heavy iron gate. Try the key again, said Hopeful. Christian tried it, and it worked. Then the giant was upon them. Nothing can save us now, cried Christian. All is lost. But no sooner had the giant come into the light of the sun than he had another of his fits. His limbs failed, and his legs gave way. Christian and Hopeful were quickly out of the castle grounds and out of the giant's jurisdiction. At the place where they had gone astray, they now put up a notice. Over this stile is the way to Doubting Castle. All trespassers will be destroyed. Take warning. That done, they continued in safety on the King's Highway, but not, I fear, for very long. Now, what do we learn from this chapter? Doubting Castle. Well, sometimes we doubt, don't we? Remember, Christian began to doubt after they tried to take a shortcut. They didn't want to travel on the hard road anymore because their feet hurt and they were tired. And so they looked around and they saw grass that seemed better, that seemed softer, but it led them astray and they began to doubt. And for days they had no food or water, but suddenly when they were at their lowest, Christian remembered. He remembered his key, Promise. Isn't that a wonderful name, Promise? Now, we don't have keys named Promise, but we do have the promises of Scripture. And as we read them and as we meditate on them, they will help alleviate our doubts and restore to us hope. And so that is the chapter of Doubting Castle. Next week, we will pick up chapter 8. And chapter 8 is entitled, let me find it, the next part of the journey, which seems very, very exciting. The Dark River. It was so good having story time with you this week, and I look forward to next week when we continue Dangerous Journey and read the chapter Doubting River.